A Redditor maliciously complies beautifully by working smarter, not harder. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, ask me for 4 eggs, I give you 4 eggs, using the policy I explained to you 5 times while you were ordering. This is a doozy that happened to me at my old job, a server at a breakfast place, where I fully acknowledge that there's no need for an am I the jerk because I am the jerk and I know it. I was having a particularly overwhelming shift, and about 3 hours into a 6-hour shift, 2 people came in that were particularly known for their being divorced and completely loathing one another quite openly to the servers and staff, and were overall very loud and rude to guests and staff alike. Every other weekend, they would come in and go over paperwork and divorce things, and the server who would get them always got sympathy from the rest of us. I had the pleasure of serving these lovely people a few times, and all of the times were so insanely different in terms of weirdness. But let's just get into this one. They come in and it ends up being my turn in the rotation. Yikes, but I thought me and the guy were chill because the last time I served them, I told him I liked his dinosaur shirt, and his ex-wife made fun of him for it, and I told her I thought it was a cool shirt, and he and I high-fived, and it was the most invigorating experience of my life. I come up to them and ask what I can get started for their drinks, and I can tell it's going to be a tense experience already. They were both very snappy and rude, and I was doing my best to just stay friendly. Fast forward, and I'm asking for their orders eventually, and the guy orders 4 eggs. I explained to him, we double our yolks. If you order 4 eggs, you'll receive 8 total eggs. He tells me no, he wants 4 eggs. So I tell them, okay, so that's going to show up as 2 eggs in our system and on your receipt. He tells me no, he wants 4 eggs. At this point, I don't know what to tell him, but I try one more time. I tell him, yes, you will receive 4 eggs on your plate, but it will say 2 on the receipt. He says, no, I don't want to pay for 2, I want to pay for 4. I am done. At this point, I'm more confused than he is. I tell him okay, and I write it down on my order sheet. I put in the order manually because we don't have a button for 4 eggs because we double our eggs. The head cook calls me over. He says, 4? I say that's what the customer ordered. He says okay, and he makes the most beautiful over easy sheet of 8 eggs with a side of bacon. It comes out and I serve it to him. He looks at me and says, this isn't what I ordered. I say yes it is, and he says fine, I'll take it. I got yelled at for it at the end of the shift, but it was so worth the look on his face when I served it to him, and the laughs it got from my coworkers, who told me that they wished it was them to serve it to him. One of my favorite memories from working at that place. I have a picture of the 8-egg beauty, but I can't post it here. Honestly, with the atmosphere, with their partner being there and the situation between them, I feel like this guy was here to argue. This guy arrived and he's obviously going to be in an uptight mood and he's like, I'm gonna take it out on the eggs. Elcom commented, it confuses me as well. Why would a restaurant do it? Just cut the price by half and don't confuse people anymore. Then you can say your eggs are good and really cheap or something. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is Benchy about my appearance? I'll change it for you. This story features malicious compliance towards multiple people, particularly my parents, the boss of my old job, and my grandmother. I don't call myself goth necessarily. At the very least, if I did, it wouldn't be my only label. Suffice it to say I like dressing like something undead and Victorian, much to the horror of my staunchly religious parents and many other adults in my life. Last year, I finally moved out and got myself a job, yet still my family and even my boss at my job are incredibly rude and controlling of me, an adult's appearance. Once on my day off, I answer a video call from my parents in which they proceed to berate me for the lack of color in my outfits. Really, no how are you, just straight to complaints. At this point, I've had enough. I'm an adult who can make my own decisions, and I have a plan. I promise them oh so sweetly to add more color to my appearance if they stop freaking complaining, and they agree. After this call, I needed to pick something up from work. Wondrous! A rare opportunity to wear my usual clothes in the workplace instead of my uniform. Again, my boss tells me I only wear black and that I need color. Ironic, coming from the man who repeatedly tells me I'm only allowed to wear neutral tones with my uniform. I tell him he doesn't need to worry because I'll be very colorful tomorrow. The next morning, I clock into work with a giant grin and the brightest electric blue punk rock mullet they've ever seen. My boss is trying to smile, but it doesn't reach his eyes and his fists are clenching his pen. I thought you said I needed more color. I smile innocently. Later on call with my parents, they remind me that dyeing hair is unholy and that I look like one of those liberals. Tragic, truly. Whatever will grandmother do? I haven't spoken to either of them since I got a new job. Regardless, my mental health has improved noticeably, and my hair is now dyed blasphemously black. Because as much as I liked it blue, black is my favorite color. I think the moral of the story here realistically is, do what you want with your clothes and your appearance, within reason. I mean, if you need to hold down the job and they can or will fire you for something, probably shouldn't do that even if it's what you want to do. I can't say blue punk rock mullet is going to be high up on my list, but more power to you. Scribbles2539 commented, I worked at a card store right after I got out of college and we were told no unnatural hair colors. Okay, bet. So I dyed my hair a purple black, aka like a raven, so in the fluorescent lights it looked black. Very demure, very mindful. But when that afternoon sun hit it, we had direct sunlight right into the eyeballs from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. till sundown. It was the brightest purple. My manager was in late one afternoon and she finally saw my hair after more than a month. And she was like, oh wow, I didn't realize your hair was purple. Well done. Our next story is lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate. Back before cell phones and TSA checkpoints, I was working as an admin assistant. Ray was my department head and had a great sense of humor. When I was hired on, Ray made sure that I understood that I worked for him. Even though I would do some office-wide work, he was my boss. Clint was in charge of another department in our office. Flying from our office to a satellite office for a day or two was common for people in both departments, and I was in charge of making standard pre-approved travel arrangements. If someone needed to change unexpectedly, they were supposed to handle those themselves. Clint seemed unable to understand that. At some point, Clint decided that he wanted to cut travel costs. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate for his department. Lowest possible fares were always the 5 a.m. outbound and 11 p.m. return flights. Clint didn't care. A couple of weeks into this policy, Clint is to head to the satellite office for some in-person meetings. Game on. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate. Clint left on the 5 a.m. flight. The lowest rate car rental company didn't keep their cars available at the airport. Clint had to take the shuttle to their off-site location to pick up his car. Sadly for Clint, the shuttle didn't start running until 8 when his first meeting was scheduled to start. Oops. The client refused to reschedule that day but agreed to the next morning. At some point, it dawned on Clint that he either had to fly home and back or get a room for the night. He chose to get a room and, of course, call me. One lowest possible rate room coming up. Unsurprisingly, the room didn't have security on site like he was used to. It did have little multi-legged friends, if his complaints were true. The next morning, Clint headed out in the previous day's suit, only to discover that his car had been broken into overnight. The police took their time arriving, and by the time they were done, Clint had missed his meeting again. Somehow, Clint got the client to reschedule again, and he decided to take the flight home and back the next day. Of course, I was kind enough to remember the lowest possible fare rule, so Clint was booked on the 11 p.m. flights home and 5 a.m. return, even though his meeting was midday. This time, the lowest rate car was at the airport, so Clint got to skip the shuttle. You can't win them all. At that point, Clint's lowest possible policy had already cost the company at least double what a normal trip would have. Not to mention all the time I'd spent calling hotels, motels, and car rental companies. The next day, he's on the 5 a.m. flight and makes it to his meeting. I don't know when he realized that he didn't want the lowest possible fare at 11 p.m. I do know that he decided to take the more expensive, earlier flight home both days. Somehow, he discovered that he could change that himself. The next time I saw Clint, he tried to fire me. Too bad, I worked for Ray, who knew and laughed about the whole thing. Clint was furious, but there wasn't anything he could do. The company would back Ray, and Ray was backing me. Clint changed the room rate policy because of his experience, but refused to rescind the lowest fare and lowest rental rate policy. That was until accounting let slip that not only had Clint figured out how to take the higher priced earlier flight, he figured out an upgraded seat as well. Clint found himself with an entire department intentionally missing their 5 a.m. flights and rebooking for the more expensive 8 a.m., which somehow only had upgraded seats available every time. Rental car reservations were missed and more expensive cars were rented. Meetings that were previously in the office were somehow only available after hours, so clients were taken to dinner. Dinner included alcohol, so rooms were booked at hotels closest to the restaurants, and returning flights scheduled for the next day. Less than a month later, all lowest rate policies were rescinded. I was allowed to book normally again, and the missed flights, upgraded seats, and fancy hotels disappeared. Dinner meetings remained, but decreased dramatically. When I left, Clint's reputation still hadn't recovered. Time and time again, I see stories like this where they want to make some kind of change, they want to cut back on the fees. Oftentimes, it's about things like per diems and like what you can or can't spend food on. It just almost always ends up upsetting the employees, and they start finding whatever way possible to make the company spend as much as possible. But realistically, what can you expect from your employees when you turn around and make their experiences with travel, with per diem, whatever, so miserable? Dan Britt commented, "We went through a phase of cheapest options / insanely low budgets for a while, which led to some interesting stays. A hotel in Switzerland with the same stained plastic floor and wall coverings, a glorified hostel in Sweden, and a sofa bed in some random Airbnb living room in Germany. Of course, when the CEO decided to join for a particularly important meeting, he got the same standard of accommodation, and unsurprisingly, the budgets magically raised afterwards. Always remember one time one of the exec team sent a company-wide email asking to limit travel costs, take public transport, book early, etc. Showed up at an event 2 days later having forgotten to book his travel and shelled out $1,000 on the day for the same trip others had paid under $200 for. Our next story is, you can't use that phone. Teacher in an early primary state. Back in the 1980s, candidates spent a lot of shoe leather looking for votes, and one way was to speak at schools, in between shaking hands at factory entrances and going to Rotary luncheons. A colleague was in the middle of class when a minor candidate but the governor of a state walked into his class and said, "Excuse me, I need to use your phone. I'm in the middle of class and you can't use that phone." The governor looked a little shocked, and there was a standoff until the central office assistant superintendent of whatever said, "It'll only be a minute." My friend asked if he needed privacy. The governor nodded. "Okay, class is over," my friend said, looking at the admin. "Head on down to the cafeteria and we'll just have a study hall, since this call is more important than my class." As the kids left, the governor picked up the phone and waited, and then he asked, "How do I get an outside line?" "You can't," he said. "It's an internal phone. I told you you can't use that phone." And off he went for a little break. So was this like a part of like a weird attempted advertising plan where like they hoped to take this very important call in front of the entire class? Or was this just a really clueless governor just completely interrupting this classroom and leaving, I would say, a pretty bad impression? Although, to be fair, if I were in that classroom and this governor came in and said, "Hey, can I use the phone?" and as a consequence I got to just go hang out in the cafeteria, I would have been kind of psyched. Independent Date 62 commented, "Honestly, that teacher had his priorities straight. I love the part where the governor realized he couldn't make an outside call. It's like, dude, this isn't your campaign headquarters. It's a classroom. It's refreshing to see someone who doesn't bend over just because some suit walks in. Though, I gotta say, this kind of drama shows how out of touch politicians can be. Maybe treat teachers in their spaces with a bit more respect next time, right?" This next story is, swimming too fast? Have fun suffering. The other day, I was at my local pools. I looked over all the open lanes, searching for an uncrowned lane to do some laps. Out of the available lanes, one had 3 people and another had 1. Like any reasonable person, I hopped into the lane with only a single other person and began to do my laps. On my first lap, I overtook the other person and was told quite aggressively that the fast lane is over there, pointing to the lane with 3 people in it. I'm usually a fast swimmer, but the lap I did was average, if not slow. Before I continue, I should mention that literally every other slow person that I swum with had been completely okay with me swimming fast. Where I swim, there's also an unofficial custom that when 2 people are in a lane, you swim side by side instead of the usual clockwise circle. This person was not okay with me swimming quickly, was very rude in telling me to move to a more crowded lane, and was in fact a very slow swimmer. Well, I thought to myself, I'm definitely not moving to a more crowded lane. I guess I should start swimming slower to appease her. I guess since my shoulder really hurts from my competition the other day and I definitely don't want to injure it more, I should do some relaxing kicking. And that's exactly what I did. I did kick. Now, my kick is definitely not fast, but I purposely did it even slower because obviously, this is the slow lane. My kick was so slow, the person started overtaking me. I made sure that they suffered. I would start when they were very close to the wall to force them to slow down, and I would swim in such a way that they didn't have enough space to overtake me. The best thing happened about 10 minutes after I started my malicious compliance. 2 other old-timers jumped into our lane. Now I started swimming in such a way that I would be next to the old-timers in a way that suggested I was overtaking them, but I never seemed to be quite fast enough to actually overtake them. How unfortunate! This formed a wall, and I would occasionally look back to see the person stopping every few seconds to not run into anyone, looking annoyed every time they had to do so. Eventually, they got so fed up that they hopped out, and as soon as they did so, I started swimming at my normal pace again, making sure that every time I finished a lap, I would make eye contact to further annoy them. The old-timers weren't that upset that I was swimming faster. In fact, no one who jumped into that lane was. I hope that person learns their lesson and never tries to tell anyone that they're swimming too fast aggressively ever again. I would like to point out that I have no issue moving to another lane or sticking to one side of my lane, but I definitely have an issue with aggression. The real problem is this guy went to a public freaking pool and expected to have some kind of control over the circumstances. Bellatrix Ed commented, "This is a duck move. There are usually set lanes for fast, mid, slow, and you go with your pace even if it's more crowded. The crowd doesn't matter if you're watching. I hate when someone significantly slower than me gets in the lane, and I think it goes both ways. If you're fast, don't get in the slow lane." OP responded to that commenting, "While you are correct in stating that lanes are split by speed, the fast lane contained 3 people, all who were way faster than I was swimming or could swim. So I had a reason for jumping into my lane, one marked medium, not slow, because that was the speed I believed I was going. Also, like mentioned in the post, I would have moved lanes even if I was too fast, if it weren't for the person's aggressiveness." Our next story is, "Leave things as the professionals said it." I shared this in a comment a while ago and was told I should share it, so I thought I would finally get around to sharing it with a little more information. About a decade ago, I worked for a big-name company, electrostatic powder coating semi-wheels. The GM, who was actually a really good boss, got a trainer to come in and teach me what I was doing right and wrong. After a week, we got things narrowed down with the settings on the machines that my quality improved a lot, and my quantity of wheels I could paint in a day improved by about 5 to 10 per day. I was now averaging anywhere from 50 to 65 wheels a day. I used those same settings for almost a year before that same GM started messing with them. I had a few wheels from a trash company come to me covered in dried mud one day. Not the first time and wasn't going to be the last. I had knocked off as much as I could before stripping them and did my best to blow off what dust was left. I still miss some spots on the edges. Usually when this happens, I end up with tiny holes on the edges of the rims. That day, the GM had come back to get a count of paint to see what needed to be ordered. The GM said, "What's with all the holes on the edges of these wheels?" I said it's from dirt. I didn't get it all off when I blew off the wheels. The GM says, "Dirt doesn't cause this. I think your settings are the issue." I reply, "I'm telling you it's dirt. Every time we get these customers' wheels in with dried mud all over them, this is what happens." The GM replied, "Dirt doesn't cause this. I'll have some people come in to check this out." He left after that. Fast forward to the next week, and he meets me in the morning with about 4 other people. The GM says, "These guys are going to look over the machines and adjust things so we no longer have issues." I reply, "I told you it was dirt." The GM replies, "The professionals are going to adjust the settings and you will leave them where they're at. If you don't, you will get written up. This is not up for discussion." Okay, message heard loud and clear. I'll leave it to the professionals and not touch a thing. Thankfully, my powder gun had multiple settings. I asked the professional to set his new settings on another preset. The next day, I noticed the wheels I painted were coming out yellow. I also noticed that the paint was very thin in certain spots. Due to my new settings, the positive charge was blasting powdered paint away from the wheels. A few days go by, GM comes back and sees all my new painted white wheels yellow and asks why everything is coming out yellow. I told him it was because the oven was set too high. The GM replies, "Why didn't you change it? That's over 100 wheels that need to be redone." I reply, "I was told not to change the settings the professionals set, so I didn't touch it." He walked over and turned it down and told me to leave it. A week later, I get called into the office. One of our biggest customers was complaining that their wheels needed to be removed and repainted after a week or two due to starting to rust. We delivered over 150 wheels a week to them. The GM asked me, "What is going on here? The paint's too thin and the customer's complaining. Do I need to call the professionals back in to look things over?" I replied, "It wouldn't change much because I haven't touched anything on the machines since they were out last time." The GM says, "Just fix it. I don't care what you do, just fix it." He never questioned me again when it came to powdered coating. I mean, I just want to know where he's getting these professionals from. I think the only thing that they're professional at is ensuring that they have job security because they keep getting called out for their own failure. Viridian Cthulhu commented, "Reminds me of my last job. Spent 3 to 4 weeks training on all the machines in our department, got so comfortable with how everything ran after 2 to 3 months that my supervisor, my immediate boss, and the plant president, boss of the entire location, was coming to me first when something wasn't going right. I had so much respect for our plant president because of that. He came out on the floor every day, talked with all of us in every department, wanted to know if we needed anything or if anything was going on that was preventing efficiency, trusted those of us on the machines because we ran them every day and would know if something was off. We were all pretty sure he had started in a similar position, which is why he showed respect to all of us. But every office personnel between my supervisor and plant president, you never saw or heard from them until something went wrong. And then all of a sudden they had all the answers and telling you how to do your job when they had never run any of the machines. All because they had read a booklet outlining the basics of running them. The first 6 months or so, I would try arguing with them that what they were saying didn't apply, wouldn't work, or would make things worse, etc. Plant president would even back me and tell them to listen to what I was saying since I had the experience. But they just decided their higher position meant they were right and would keep pushing. So I would have to do their suggestions, which never worked or in fact made it worse, which just made things take longer to fix. After those first 6 months, I was just tired of their BS and stopped arguing and just did what they said, knowing it would still never work or would make it worse. After about 2 years of seeing their input always failing to fix the problem, and it was almost always something I already knew how to fix or could figure out on myself, on rare occasions maintenance would have to be called, but I was still the one telling them what needed to be done. I was just unable to do it myself. The plant president finally put his foot down and told the entire office my word was what mattered for my department. If anyone tried to argue or tell me how to do my job going forward, he would go even higher up to the national president of the company and make them back off. For reference, the plant president was over everyone who directly worked for that location, while many of the office personnel were considered working for the national company, thus on a more pure level with the plant president. The entire rest of the time I worked there, I never saw any of the other office personnel back in my department. Our next story is Work Smart, Not Hard. I got hired as a line cook when I got out of culinary school. It was a big hotel chain. I got hired for the day-to-day work, and we had 8 other line cooks and a head chef who was always bragging about his workload and how he spared us from the paper monster. The head chef was, for a better word, absent from the kitchen floor and basically a pencil pusher. He did the ordering, the HACCP lists, stocking, timesheets, rosters, schedules, communication with HR, GM, F&B, and he made the menus. For the most part, the work paid okay and there wasn't much hassle. Thing was, the menus we had to cook were outdated and very uninspiring. Like, think about cookbooks from 70 years ago uninspiring. At some point, we as a kitchen team were done with that, and we requested that we make the menus. Head chef, for some reason, was happy to oblige. So now comes the kicker. We had an after-hours menu with simple meals, BLT, pizza, salad, soup, fries, hamburgers. For some reason, corporate decided that the after-hours menu had to go and be replaced by the normal day-to-day menu. This led to the following situation. Almost nobody ordered food during the night shift. Turns out, when people come to a hotel late, they're either too tired or too drunk to eat a meal that takes around 15 minutes to serve, or are in no mood for a sautéed salmon and white wine sauce. This went on for like a year, and corporate saw the nosedive in the night shift revenue across the board, and they made the only logical decision to combat this problem. Fire all night shift line cooks or relocate them to other hotels if they could not be fired. Of course, the after-hours menu was not changed, nor was it removed. No, it instead meant the shift had to be picked up by another. So this is where the tale really started. So I worked there for about 2 years, and I got in some trouble with the head chef. We didn't see eye to eye. This led to the following situation. I had to pick up almost every night shift. I would come in at 4 in the afternoon and leave around 5 in the morning. I worked 40 hours on paper, but in reality, I worked around 50-ish. I didn't mind, as overtime was paid out, and me as a 21-year-old could do a lot with the paid out OT. Thing was, it was so boring. In the beginning, I cleaned the kitchen, checked the walk-ins for spoiled goods, set up a part of the breakfast, and did some minor paperwork. After about 3 weeks, I ran out of work to do. Every 2 or 3 days, I could clean something or check the fridges, but what first took an hour now took like 10 to 15 minutes. So I did the logical thing and started reading books, watching Netflix, talking to the night manager, starting to experiment with new recipes, and hanging out with the interns. Basically, I was freaking around on company time. So after a while, I get called into the office of the GM. I got a verbal reprimand for slacking. When I asked him why, he told me someone told him what I did during night shift. So I, of course, explained to him what I did and that in between these hours, I had little to do. This led to a discussion between corporate, GM, and my union about what I could and could not do within the position I was hired for, but that's a story for another time. At the end of this whole ordeal, I was tasked with kitchen paperwork, and Chef just unloaded his whole workload on me, telling me to get to work and that the time for slacking was over. He said this all smug, and apparently he was assuming I wouldn't finish this, or I would come begging for help. I had to do timesheets, order produce, and answer emails. Chef was always bragging about the work and that it took a whole week. After one look, I knew he wasn't familiar with computers and the various programs he had to work with. Within a month, I'd figured out that our time management system could be linked to our payroll system, and I only had to check if the breaks were logged correctly, hit the sync button, and place a request for validation by the GM/HR. Same went for our ordering software. I could upload a produce list and order from an iPad while walking around to the different walk-ins and freezers. Also, I combined this with a 2-day spoil check. Within 2 months or so, I found out that the work schedule sheet could be copied to another week, and with another software link, I could sync our HR app so it would automatically generate a warning when someone was on leave or vacation. It took me 2 night shifts to do all of the above, and the other 3, I could slack. Due to this, Chef had nothing to do in the office, and in turn was slacking. He had nothing to do during the day but to sit around in his office. After about 2 months, somebody slipped this info to the GM. After that, Chef had to work in the kitchen, and his 9 to 5 changed. He had to do breakfast shifts as he failed to do line cook work. He was stuck 30 years back when sticking everything in jelly was a trend. Soon after this, corporate got wind of this great innovation and asked our chef to document this all and send this over to them. When I left the company due to other reasons, corporate were contemplating cutting the head chef's position and making the front and back manager responsible for the kitchen. Does anybody else hear the story and actually have like some level of respect for how well that chef has managed to coast for so long? I mean, if they get put on as a line cook and they're still in that mentality of everything needs to be in jello, like just how long has that chef managed to coast along in some minimal task but high up position, just banking those paychecks? Hesh582 commented, "That sounds like a terribly managed hierarchy all around. A head chef who never steps foot in the kitchen but just does paperwork that should have been either the front and back manager or a lower level employee. Seemingly nobody in between the head chef and the GM. A large corporate setting but a kitchen wholly run down to the menus by the whims of a single head chef. This is what corporate food service used to look like, and it sure doesn't anymore. At any competent organization, the position of front and back manager has grown significantly in importance, pretty much precisely to prevent this sort of crap from happening. This next story is dump truck delivery. 20 plus years ago now, I worked at a landscaping supply business driving a dump truck. I've been a software engineer for most of the time since, but at that time, well, mistakes were made and I spent a few years driving a truck. These were single-axle trucks, 26,000 pounds gross. We often overloaded them by about a ton. Muscuda was on the edge of the area we often delivered to, and we occasionally took rock or mulch to the high school there. I arrived one day with probably 4 or 5 tons of topsoil. If I recall correctly, I had to drive around the school and find someone. I suspect I'd been instructed on where to meet people, and those people weren't there. I asked after the name I had on the delivery ticket when I found someone and was informed that it was a math or physics, I don't recall, but something STEM-related teacher I was looking for. I think I may have asked that person if they could find them for me. Eventually, I met the teacher and 3 or 4 students in front of the school. I didn't know any of them. I might have still been 19 or 20 at the time, and I looked young. It wasn't rare to be forced to find people for a delivery, and everything was normal so far. I got out of the truck and was told that the dirt was to be dumped into a planter they had been assembling with decorative blocks around the sign for the high school. It was out maybe 50 feet into the grass between the road and the parking lot in front of the school. I hesitated and might have managed to say before being interrupted. I was going to say that the truck would leave marks in the grass. The truck, at 12,000 pounds empty, was heavy enough that it would compress the dirt, and even though the grass would only be flattened, it would leave a trail anywhere the truck went. Likely an inch or 2 deep that wouldn't go away anytime soon. The tracks would be conspicuous. I don't recall if I got more than 1 syllable out before I was interrupted with a condescending tone, initially from the teacher, and then from 1 or 2 of the students. I tried to speak again, and again I was met with a mix of disbelief that I didn't understand the instructions, and further attempts to explain what they wanted me to do as though I was 5 years old or didn't speak English. I believe I attempted to speak 2 or 3 times before giving up. I acquiesced, got back in the truck, and proceeded to drive out into the grass, leaving ruts that the groundskeepers would regret for years to come. The grass will be cut off level above these ruts, but you'll still feel them when you drive over them with a mower. I backed the truck up to one side of the planter and dumped dirt in until it was piled above the small semi-oval retaining wall, and I was signaled to stop. The sign was in the middle of the planter, which meant that the pile was only on one side. The other side was pretty much empty. I expected that we would want to drive to the other side of the planter. When you dump enough piles of something, you get a feel for what it's going to take to fill a space. But after being told to stop, I got out to suggest that they would want more dirt here to fill the entire planter. Again, I was not able to finish a sentence. I attempted to tell them that when they spread the dirt out in the planter, it wasn't going to be anywhere near the brim. I also would have been willing to stay while they moved some dirt over to the bare area so we could dump more in without spilling out onto the grass. It was clear they had no use for anything I might have to say. The disrespect was clearly intentional. I'm not sure if there was some perceived slight or if this was just a wolf pack who did this to everyone. I was told to go dump the remaining soil. There was probably 2 or 3 tons left in the truck. It could have been put to good use in the planter still, but they wanted it dumped out in a row crop field back behind the school. Here's another intricacy of working with a dump truck you might not intuit. Dirt doesn't spread evenly out of a dump bed. Most trucks have chains for the gate that allow you to meter how quickly the material comes out of the truck. These work great with small rock and gravel. With material that's more prone to clumping, you set the chains such that the gate can open wider and be less prone to clogging, but for dirt and mulch, it effectively doesn't work. It hits the gate, compacts a bit, and is clogged. Then you can't release the chains because there are thousands of pounds of material pressed against it. You have to dig it out, which is a lot of work, even with gravity helping, and of course, the whole exercise was futile from the start. Thankfully, these people didn't know to ask, or I'm sure they would have directed me how to do my job, and then I would have been faced with either arguing with people who didn't care what I thought, or setting the chains and then spending 10 minutes unclogging the gate of the truck. You might guess that there's too much nuance in that to convey in a scenario where I've yet to be allowed to finish a sentence. We weren't having a conversation, and these people were enjoying this for some reason. This was a long time ago, and I don't remember much of what was said to me, but I do clearly remember one kid slowly explaining, "Just take the truck over there and drive while you dump it out," or something to that effect, with hand gestures like you would explain something to a child. By this point, I wouldn't pee on them if they were on fire, so I wasn't inclined to expose myself to any more of this noise. I had them sign for the delivery and then drove around the school and into the field. I felt a little bad for whoever farmed this field, so I actually did try to make it work as well as possible. I also doubted they had permission. I drove about as fast as I was willing to drive in a recently tilled field and started raising the bed. As topsoil is wont to do, nothing happened until the mass started sliding and essentially landed in the field in a large pile. You could tell that, if you knew what you were looking at, the truck had been moved when it was dumped, but it was still a pile that someone was going to have to deal with. I drove past the school a week or so later on another delivery. I was curious to see if they had gone out to the field to get some of the nice sifted topsoil when they realized the planter was barely half filled, or to maybe use it to patch the ruts in the grass. There were still obvious tracks leading to the newly constructed planter. The planter was half filled with dirt, leaving the back of multiple courses of block exposed, and the large pile of dirt was still standing out in the field. The planter stayed that way for years. I don't know if anyone ever fixed it. The entire complex was apparently demolished and has been replaced with a new building now. I moved out of the area a long time ago. I'm not entirely certain that this was malicious compliance. I wasn't trying to be malicious, but I wasn't going to argue with people who were being both insulting and borderline hostile. I held that job way too long, maybe 6 years, so I certainly had more bad or weird encounters with customers. Like the time I guess I disappointed a couple trying to have a delivery man three-way, but this one was one of the worst. Honestly, in my opinion, as long as you can get the job done in a reasonable amount of time and get the heck out of there, who cares if you have to do it according to their demands and desires? Unless, it's something that literally goes against so much protocol in your job that you would almost want them to write down and sign something saying, "Yeah, I told them to do this way." Joel BB commented, "People with seemingly greater education or knowledge or illusion of such will always act like these people did. I may have more on-paper education than a lot of people I hang around with, IT versus dump truck drivers and excavator drivers, but I know where and when they know oh so much better than I do, and as such, know when to limit my input to well-meaning suggestions, and not all, but some of them, know who to ask when they have computer trouble. Some do know better than me there too, depending on the issue." That said, our next story is no assistant for me. Let's see how that works out. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was still living in my home country. I worked in a warehouse that served as a distribution center for a supermarket chain. A very famous one, by the way. I was an inspector in the shipping department. Basically, the sorting section would bring to the docks the goods that the store had requested, and we would prepare and load the shipment onto the truck. In the shipping department, there were assistants who did the manual work, assembling loads on pallets, wrapping them with stretch film, and loading them onto the truck, while the inspector checked whether everything being sent to the store was correctly labeled and secure for transport. Additionally, the inspector entered all the data in the internal system, sealed the truck, and printed the load summary for the administrative department to generate an invoice. Of course, inspectors also helped the assistants with the heavy lifting. Most of the time, this didn't interfere with our main responsibilities and actually sped up the process, especially since our shift, the afternoon shift, had an issue with trucks arriving late. Many times, we wouldn't finish everything on time, leading to overtime and sometimes having to leave the remaining work for the night shift, which wasn't ideal since each shift had its own list of stores to attend to, and this delay affected them. Each inspector worked with at least one assistant, but sometimes more depending on their workload. Some inspectors had more stores to handle that day. Some stores required extra loads or other situations that called for additional help. We had a supervisor who had been with the company for many years and had worked in the department before being promoted. The job was great and everything ran smoothly until a crisis hit another department, leaving it without a supervisor. Management decided they needed someone experienced to lead that department, so they transferred our supervisor there. In his place, they promoted someone from another department who had no leadership experience. Our department was running well with no need for drastic changes, but our new supervisor didn't see it that way. One day I arrived at work, and as usual at the beginning of the shift, the supervisor printed out a sheet listing the stores to be handled that day, along with which inspector was assigned to each one. So far so good. He made some changes, but nothing too concerning. However, before we started working, he called the entire department for a quick meeting. In this meeting, he announced that he had reassigned which assistants would work with which inspectors and showed us a printed list. To my surprise, there was no name next to mine. In other words, I was expected to work without an assistant. I protested immediately. I don't remember the exact details of the discussion as it happened a long time ago, but basically his idea was that as other assistants finished helping their assigned inspectors, whoever was available would come help me, something that already happened naturally as we had a strong sense of camaraderie in our department. Plus, nobody wanted to be seen by the bosses standing around doing nothing, but it wasn't enough. It would overburden me. I tried to argue my case, but I couldn't convince him. Other inspectors were also left without assistance, but they were relatively new to the company and didn't say anything, probably out of fear of losing their jobs or something similar. Well, since I couldn't change his mind, I accepted that I would be working without an assistant. I took the signs for the stores I was responsible for, found available docks for them, placed the signs on the dock gates, noted on the printed sheet which stores were at which docks, then went to the dock of the first store I would handle. I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and waited. Goods started arriving, but I didn't touch a single box. The dock filled up and I didn't move an inch. After a few hours, the supervisor walked through the department to check on things, saw the state of my dock, and asked why the load wasn't being prepared. I simply said, "I don't have any assistants. How am I supposed to prepare the load?" and remained standing with my arms crossed. Eventually, some assistants came to help me, and when they did, I helped them with the heavy lifting. But soon, the inspectors they were originally assigned to needed more help, and of course, they left my load behind. By the end of the shift, one load was ready to be loaded onto the truck, but another was only halfway done. I placed the paperwork with the load details in a visible spot for whoever would finish it and left. As I was leaving, my supervisor asked about the loads. Without turning around, I told him where the papers were. He asked if I wasn't going to finish them, and I didn't even respond. The next day, he called me in for a meeting. When I arrived, the manager was also there. They asked me what had happened the previous day. I replied, "Nothing that I remember." They brought up the incomplete loads. I explained that my shift had ended and I couldn't stay for overtime, so I left the information for whoever would finish the job, and I even told the supervisor where the papers were. Then, I took out my wallet, pulled out my time card receipt, and showed them that I'd clocked out at the designated time. They mentioned that I'd spent most of the shift standing with my arms crossed. I responded that I had done my job, which, as stated in my contract, consisted solely of verifying the load, supervising assembly and loading, entering data into the system, sealing the truck, and printing the load summary. Nothing beyond that. I continued by saying that anything else I might do during my shift was purely out of goodwill to help the assistants and speed up the work. But on the previous day, I had chosen to exercise my right not to perform those extra tasks because I felt unfairly treated by my supervisor, who had not assigned me a dedicated assistant. That would have significantly overburdened me with tasks I wasn't paid to do. The manager simply looked at the supervisor and said, "He needs to have an assistant." Then he turned to me and asked me to leave. The two of them stayed there for quite a while. That same day, I was assigned an assistant, and we never spoke of it again. Nothing like that ever happened again. The new supervisor's stint lasted only a few months before he returned to his previous role. He had put too much trust in employees he was friends with, but who weren't very competent at their jobs, and that was his downfall. Our old supervisor came back to his position, and everything improved again. I mean, I just know if I were in OP's position, I wouldn't be overextending myself. Definitely wouldn't be going way out of my way when you make my job that much harder and annoying. And honestly, shoot, if you can get away with folding your arms and just standing there and getting paid, I mean, how many people wouldn't just do that and try to press it until they get some kind of redirection to actually do a job? HMS Lardy Bartfast commented, "Having seen this happen multiple times, I've learned, do your job. If you do someone else's job, it becomes your job without extra pay or resources. This wasn't actual malicious compliance, this was what's best for the department. Still a very good post. OP responded saying, "I never had a problem doing that with the assistants, doing it in their place was the problem." HMS responded to that saying, "If you had done your assistant's job though, then your supervisor would have assumed you would always do your assistant's job. He was trying to get you to do their job also, probably thinking, if I can get the inspectors to do more work, I need less assistants. Once he can show you do it, then he can work on reducing the number of assistants. Surprised he didn't have you teach assistants how to do the paperwork though. Then he could have gotten rid of inspectors and just used assistants." Our next story is, "Don't want me to touch your PS5? Well, alright. I bought a PlayStation 5 for my cousin back in my home country last year. I live in the Middle East, and whenever I visit family in my home country, I often go with gifts. I recently started on my first, somewhat well-paying job and decided to get something nice for the family home. I got my little cousin brother a PS5. My cousin's 16. We had been playing on my account due to the lack of games on his. We hadn't had time to go and buy any that he liked yet, and his mom wouldn't let him go and buy any for himself until after the week of his exams, which were a couple of weeks after I had to return to the Middle East. The trip was nice. My cousin was very happy with the gift. We spent a few hours at night playing against each other on FIFA. Now, this one time my cousin was at school, and I decided I'd hop on one of my games and finish the story. The game I was playing was God of War Ragnarok. Apparently it was one of the games he wanted to play. Now, the issue was that he saw me playing that game on his PS5 when he returned home from school and went ape crap. His words were, "Don't touch my PS5." He meant when he's not around because he wants to play the games himself and not get the saves messed up or something. But he didn't mention that at first. I told him that this was my account. The saves are already on the cloud and connected to mine. He can get a fresh start on his account later. It's not a big deal. He said he didn't care and repeated that he didn't want me to touch his PS5 when he was at school. I tried to explain once again, and he screamed at me that, if that's all it is, then get your precious account off my PS5. At this point, I was done with his tantrum anyway. Cue malicious compliance. I deleted my account from his PS5 and told him I won't touch it anymore. He was smug about me taking the L then, but later that night when he got around to try and play the games, well, all my games were now locked out on his account. He tried to access my account, but, well, that's no longer on it. He doesn't know the password, and I have two-factor authentication anyway. He even went on to the store to check the price of the game he wanted to play, but, well, what money was he going to use to buy them? Finally, he came up to me and nonchalantly asked me if I want to play FIFA together again. I smirked internally and responded that I won't touch his PS5. He can play it on his own. He tried to convince me that it would be fun and said that he can beat me in a few matches and all that. I said the same thing. I am not touching that PS5 again. He realized finally that he'd be effectively locked out of playing anything except Astro's Playroom for the next couple weeks if I don't get my account on it again. His mom knew what had happened and had asked me not to put my account on it again anyway. He needed to focus on his upcoming exams, so I didn't. No matter how much he begged me, I let him stew with no games, with the PS5 teasing, all the while I enjoyed the rest of my vacation with the rest of my family. Edit. God dang, this post blew up. This happened sometime August of last year. My cousin did apologize, albeit a few days after I'd left the country. That may have been his mom taking him to task about the entire thing, but he did seriously apologize for it, and I could tell he meant it. I didn't take it any further than this because, well, he's just a kid. I let his mom handle everything after my bit of malicious compliance. As for the people asking what I mean by cousin brother, he's my father's younger brother's son. I don't know if I use the right term, but that's what I call him. He's my cousin, who's about as close to me as my own brother. Would most of you agree with me when I say that this is ultimately just a lesson they had to learn? They couldn't even understand the concept of the account being on the PS5 and what that means if OP doesn't touch it anymore. And also, like, come on, you gotta be amicable about sharing the games together. Revengeful Cargo commented, "So within days of you giving him a PS5, he's telling you, 'Don't touch my PS5'? That kid needs a serious attitude adjustment." Our next story is, employers, careful what you ask for. I'm an emergency physician. I work in emergency departments in hospitals. An interesting specialty in medicine, different patients every day. except for the frequent flyers, but that's another story. Now, especially in the wintertime, emergency departments are full of people, with usually long wait times, and we take people in order of severity, not first come first serve. So I'm at work and get a new patient. The chart says, needs a work note. I go into the cubicle and see a patient that is obviously ill. After 40 years of experience, I can size patients up pretty well from across the room. This woman was ill. Vitals were not good, fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit, the works. The monitor shows her heart is okay, pulse is a little high, blood pressure is a little low, high fever. Talking to her, she tells me she's got a cold. Now, I tend to appreciate it when patients just tell me the truth. She didn't claim to have COVID, pneumonia, anthrax, don't ask, or anything but a cold, which, being a virus, there's not a heck of a lot I can do for her, so I ask why she came in. Turns out she's been ill for 2 days, her fever was actually down with her taking Tylenol and drinking fluids, no kidding, and her employer wants a doctor's note for more paid time off. This woman waited in the emergency department waiting room for, checks the record, 5.5 hours to get a god-danged note for work? Not her fault though, it's her employer's. So I ask her how much time they'll give her paid off. There's no limit, she said. I just need a doctor saying I need it. Got it. So she went home with a lovely note giving her 2 weeks off with pay and instructions to return for additional time if she needs it to recover. I really hate employers that demand asinine notes like this. Fight the stupidity. So, I don't know where in the world OP is, but can I sign up to have them as my doctor? Honestly, I've had the unfortunate circumstance of having to go to an emergency department once or twice in the last 5 years. Some of the nicest or best doctors I've ever seen were in that emergency department. I remember telling the last one, I wish that I could have you as my primary care doctor. They told me I would if I had an office, but unfortunately my office is the emergency room. That kind of doctor commented, I'm a physician in Brazil. Due to our labor laws, there's no absence for work without pay cut if you don't present a doctor's note. Some employers even demand ICD coding, which is unethical and abusive. I get a perverse pleasure when I can justify giving a longer leave to honest patients, together with a copy of the jurisprudence and how to talk firmly to the HR representatives that they got no right to demand to know what the patient is on medical leave for. Our next story is, Ask and Thou Shalt Receive. Lately, I've been reading so many stories about fast food or restaurant workers giving customers exactly what they ask for, and this started me reminiscing about the time I worked at Burger King. I was in my 20s at the time. Mind you, this was way back in the 90s when our minimum wage was barely $6 an hour, nothing compared to our $20 fast food minimum wage today, California. So one day, I was working in the back making food when I heard a male Demanda, this was before we called them Karens, yelling at the cashier. She was young and this was her first job. He was saying, I want freaking extra everything, and I mean extra everything. Whenever I freaking order extra, I never get freaking extra. By this time, I already had a plan set. He wants extra everything. He will get extra everything. The cashier comes around almost in tears asking if I heard that. I respond yes and that not to worry, I'll take care of his food and hand his tray out. She said thank you and went back to wash the dishes and to calm down. I proceeded to make his Whopper, started with a top bun, 1 thick layer of mayo, about 2.5 handfuls of lettuce, 6 tomatoes, then for the patty, let's put a 1-inch layer of pickles, normally got 4 but he got about 20 to 30, a thick layer of ketchup, thick layer of mustard, and finally a 1-inch layer of onions. I slowly and carefully wrapped the burger and placed the burger next to a double Whopper on the slider. The look on my coworker's face was great. His Whopper was so much taller. I placed his sandwich onto the tray with a full thing of hot fries, called his number, and he walked up. I smiled and said, "Enjoy your burger, sir, with extra everything." I absolutely made sure. Turned and walked away. He went and sat down. I watched as he opened his burger, did a double take, looked at me directly into my eyes as I smiled, and he just slouched in defeat and ate away without saying anything. Suffice to say, the moral of the story is 1. You get what you ask for, and 2. Never ever mess with the people that make your food. I gotta be honest, all those pickles, all those onions, not really going to be a thing for me, but I can certainly imagine there's going to be people out there who find this crazy impromptu salad burger / Whopper adjacent thing, like absolutely divine. I can only imagine there's a sizable number of people who hear that description of this burger and say, "Can I get that?" I also kind of want to know, considering he ordered extra everything, did he get charged for extra everything? Fluffy Frog commented, "Something similar happened when I was working at Checkers many ages ago. We gave him the most insane burger. It was so stuffed it was hard to wrap. He came back through the drive-thru just to tell us he was so happy and it was the most perfect burger ever made." Our next story is, need my ID after surgery? Bet. Hello, I have no idea how to start this off, so I'll just give the context and jump in. Also, a bit of a trigger warning, I do mention blood and drool, but that's about it. I, 24-year-old female, had been seeing the dentist more often because I now have insurance. The last time I went to a dentist was when I was about 14 or 15. My dentist said a lot of my teeth are salvageable, but I did need to get a lot of teeth pulled. 7 to be exact. It took a couple of months to get my teeth pulled and everything, and when it did, oh my lord. The front desk lady told me I'm gonna be on antibiotics and pain medication. I'm still kind of recovering, my gums are still pretty sensitive, but overall fine. My brother, 27-year-old male, was my ride, so I called him fresh out of surgery and he's like, "You done with surgery?" I responded, "Yeah, but my mouth was stuffed with gauze." "I have no idea what you said, but I'm assuming you said yes." He came and got me, and the nurse and my brother had to help me in his truck. We went to the pharmacy, but they were on lunch break. After 30 minutes of waiting, their lunch was over. My brother left me in the truck and went into the convenience store. He was in there for a while, like 15 minutes. To most, that doesn't seem long, but to me, since the anesthesia was beginning to wear off, I was squirming in discomfort. While my brother was in the store, the pharmacist was giving him a really hard time, telling him that they need my ID and all of that fun stuff. Cue the malicious compliance. My brother walked out, told me everything, and I began to cry. Just picture an adult woman with baby face, swollen, delirious, in pain, and fresh out of surgery looking like she was trying to do the chubby bunny challenge. Anyway, my brother took me out of his truck and he had to guide me, so all of the customers in the store, all they saw was a scrawny twig dragging a barely conscious noodle to the pharmacy. He sat me down in one of the chairs and I handed him my ID. The pharmacist was about to give him a hard time again, but he then pointed in my direction. All he saw was a lost adult drooling and bleeding, clearly out of it, fresh out of surgery, and the look on his face was just glorious. He handed my brother my medication without much complaint, and we left. And before anyone gets onto my brother's case that he didn't need to drag me into the store, I want to make it clear, even then, I did not care about how silly I looked. I was too busy thinking about pink axolotls on stairs and how bad I needed a nap. Even looking back, I chuckle about it. I gotta be honest, just anything involving the dentist is like making me panic. I read the word dentist and all I can picture is just $, $. The Blitz01 commented, "I guess my oral surgeon is smarter than some. He has you pick up your prescriptions before the procedure and even has you take 2 Valium before." Our next story is, you can't call your practice Better Dental. My son called me with this story. He went to the dentist today and they had changed their name from Better Dental. He asked if they had been bought out and they said, no, well, sort of. The ownership has changed. Since Dr. Draper's not with us anymore, we can't use the name Better Dental. It's a funny story. A few years ago, another dentist complained that the practice was called Better Dental, since you're not supposed to imply that you're better than other dentists without a specific reason. The board was going to make him change the name of the practice, but he legally changed his last name to Better, and they let him keep the name on his practice. My son was skeptical, but I checked the Board of Dental Examiners website and it's 100% true. David Allard Draper changed his name to David Allard Draper Better, and the board closed its file and issued no disciplinary action for violation of 21 NCAC 16P so-and-so. It's kind of loophole defiance rather than malicious compliance, but I think it fits. You know, it's almost sort of the same thing as like, what if your name actually is McDonald? And you want to have a company, maybe not even like a food company that has your name on it. Now, I don't know about going out of your way to change your name to something like Better so you can have Better Dental, like a clearly premeditated thing, but I guess who really wants to have to spend all that money being litigious anyways? Graypon3 commented, "A law in Pennsylvania states that a funeral home has to use the mortician's name. There's a cemetery in the south part of Pittsburgh called Jefferson Memorial Cemetery. There's a mortuary there called Jefferson Memorial Funeral Home. When the old mortician named Jefferson retired, the cemetery board started looking for another Jefferson to take his place. No one named Jefferson wanted to move there. They were getting afraid that they would have to change the name of the mortuary and it wouldn't match. A young woman, fresh from mortician school, said she would change her name to Jefferson if they would hire her. They did, she did, and now she's got a permanent gig for life." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.